Hi, everyone. Welcome to Religion and Revolt. I am Olga Segura, and I am joined by my brilliant comrade, thought partner, friend, Dwayne David Paul, and we are the Religion and Revolt team. Religion and Revolt is a Black abolitionist multimedia digital platform that we are sort of launching in a variety of different phases. We launched our newsletter this past summer, and in the new year we're going to launch a podcast, a print magazine, but right now we're just going to have an informal conversation to kind of find a new way to introduce people to like the work that both of us have been doing together and individually. And before I kind of ask you how you're doing, Dwayne, I just want to thank everyone who has subscribed to our newsletter, who has joined our Baldwin reading groups. Thank you so much. We're so grateful for the community we are building. So how are you doing, homie? How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm in the middle of my like fat bear month. So you know the National Park Service does this every October.
Okay.
They do like a contest of really fat hibernating bears.
Oh,
And like it's a photo contest like the first week or so of October. And yeah, I'm in the thick of it right now. Like I feel pun really intended and enjoyed. I feel like my body kind of slowing down with
mm-hmm.
like the winter, and
Mm-hmm.
uh I'm following them rhythms, and
I
so
love
yeah,
that.
things are going well.
I love that.
Fat bear
Also,
month.
I honestly, in the prep that we were doing for this, I thought that like Fat Bear Week was just something that you had created, and I was like, "This seems really like something DDP would have a trend he would have started." So it's actually so adorable to hear that it's like a pug, like a fat pug competition.
Oh no, that they're like grizzly bears. It's like
Oh,
actual bears.
like bears.
Yeah. So it is, because they put on a ton of weight
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
to like survive through hibernation.
Wow.
Um
Okay. Okay.
and they slow down, they eat up, and that's like that window between Thanksgiving and Christmas for me is
Mm.
absolutely slowing down, eating up. And that's definitely like, the email response of like, let's
Mm-hmm.
get to that in the new year.
let's circle back in 2024.
Let's circle back. Let's circle back. January 2nd or 3rd. Like, be civilized. Like, like, what are you doing on December 20th? Telling me about business. Like
Like
an absolute savage.
like you cannot be serious right now.
You are
Like
an
I'm slowing
unserious human
down.
being.
Oh, that is so great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for sharing that you're like listening to the rhythms of your body, because that is something that is very difficult to do in like the work that we're in. But it's getting darker and it's cold. Like it makes complete sense that you're like, I want to be eating, I want to be resting, I want to be slowing down, even when it feels extremely difficult to do it in the like capitalist world that we live in, you know?
Oh, for sure. And unfortunate, like I'm in a place where like where I can do some of that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At least
Mm-hmm.
at least this year for a change.
Yeah.
Um, you know, things ramp up in the new year.
Mm-hmm.
For the last like handful of years for me, things have like kind of ramped up in January, and
Mm-hmm.
late fall and winter is usually like a season of preparation professionally,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for like legislative session or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case might be. But so yeah, I'm definitely feeling that right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I think that sort of perpetual like deep tired that pretty much everyone in my life is feeling.
Yeah,
Feeling
yeah.
that. For
Yeah, no,
sure.
that is real because I feel like every weekly meeting we have where we're like planning, what religion and revolt stuff we're gonna do, it never starts just with like editorial work. It's always 20 to 30 minutes of us just being like, how's your spirit? Did you sleep? Have you eaten today? And we both have been slowing down. I feel that very deeply too, where I'm kind of like grateful to be able to slow down and grateful that we're able to do this work, that like you and I get to decide what is sustainable, right? And when we have weeks where we're just kind of like, hey, like I'm not doing well, can we like switch stuff around? Like that feels very like, I'm just grateful. This is like the first time in my life where I'm like, I am doing something I love with a partner who is like surviving as a Black person in America in the same way, you know. So I'm grateful to be able to be working with you, and I'm grateful to be able to like interview you as well, because you and I became friends like many Black millennials on Twitter. We became friends on Twitter, you know, and I remember like, I don't even know, I think there was a point in like 2015, 2016 where I think like Black intellectuals on Twitter were just kind of like all following each other and just kind of learning and talking to each other. And you were one of the first people that I was like, I didn't know you were Catholic. I didn't know you had like done this theological work, because I was like, he's so sharp and funny and really, really critical of Christian Catholic spaces in a way that like I couldn't be yet, because, you know, I was still in Catholic media. And so I think we bonded over that and then became friends and started dreaming and building, writing together. And then Religion and Revolt was born, you know? So it was really, really great to kind of have that trajectory and that like Religion and Revolt origin story where it was like, yeah, these two people met on Twitter. Like it's like a quintessential millennial origin story. But tell me a little bit about yourself and your work. You mentioned earlier, you know, like in the past, your professional life has included a lot of like legislative work. So tell people tuning in who might be encountering us for the first time, like who you are, who Dwayne David Paul is.
For sure. So, like you, I'm from New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. I am the son of immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago. And like I grew up, I'm 37, so I grew up in like this real golden moment in New York where like before gentrification, and not just before gentrification, but like there was this like really rich Black throughout the diaspora, throughout the Latin American diaspora, even like interesting like white ethnic kind of like folks, right? Like the you know, folks from across like the Jewish diaspora, Middle Eastern diaspora, very much like, you know, sort of white ethnic as well, like, you know, interesting. And when I say interesting, that's a really shorthand for like not super far removed from like immigration, like Italians, Polish, Russians, right? Like there's like a grandparent that didn't speak English, kind of, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, that's already my interesting. Is really like it's like, ooh, you just got white, right? Like, you know what I mean? And like, you know, also like that like all my, you know, almost all of my teachers, K through 10, were Black or Latina, actually, with like a few exceptions, right? You know, like that generation of Black people who like, many of them, I should say, not all. I had some like really young teachers, but like many of that generation of Black people who like got in before, you know, like the white reaction to affirmative action, you know, and so like that like college educated sort of public sector working, and so like my like man like my, you know, like we watched like Roots in the 5th grade.
Wow, yep.
And, like, you know, we had like you know, we had like a class called like multiculturalism, you know, where we did like you know, tons of like Black history and culture. Like you know, I was joking with my friends this weekend, actually, like, you know, in the 1st grade, we were making like paper mache Zulu masks. Because again, this is like, you know, 91, 92, you know, and there's like a real particular like aesthetic and like kind of ethos of the moment. And of course my like elementary school no longer exists. It's a charter school now. And that's also telling of, of where I'm from, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
like that like giant like Caribbean neighborhood I grew up in. I just went home for Thanksgiving, and there's a Chipotle on the corner now.
Wow.
And so it's done. It's donezo. It's
It's
over.
gone. It's gone.
It's gone. We got mad Mexicans now too, which is different from when I was a kid, and they got a Chipotle on the corner. Anyway, so that's where I'm from, and I'm not gonna make this like a gentrification thing because I don't take over.
It is so much a part of your work because you went to public schools, correct? So it's like you had a very specific like old school DOE Black teachers who were like raising students to like be immersed in like Blackness and that actual history in New York City. And also when you go back home, it looks drastically different from like the Brooklyn of your childhood. So I love that you're like, we are from a New York City that is not the New York City that folks find now in Brooklyn, because charter schools, like how many public schools that had been around us for years, decades, are now charter schools. And charter schools, Chipotle, telltale signs in the neighborhood is like really gone.
It's amazing because so I went to elementary school, like I grew up on the middle of my block, and so now, and my elementary school was on the corner. And so now, like, you look to the right, it's a charter school. You look to the left, it's a Chipotle. Literally, like all like in a city block, right? That shit, like I feel like I'm losing my mind every time I go back.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
That is wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, because it's like our displacement, it's this interesting thing of like, and I know I'll ground this back in like the conversation about your bio, but I think that like so much of what informs our writing and our religion and revolt thinking is like being these Black people who are from the Caribbean. So first of all, we're not even supposed to be here. Like we're not even supposed to be here. And then we are here and we make New York City our home. And like 30 years later, this isn't our home, and like corporations are swooping in, white folks are swooping in. Meanwhile, we're also like, what does this mean for us as writers and thinkers to have to be like, we're talking about empire and imperialism, but we're also like, where Granny lives, like that place is drastically changing.
Yeah. And like, to kind of pivot, like a lot of like I experienced some loss in graduate school. I was like dead set on being a professor of some sort, and I was just gonna go figure out like what kind, and experience some like real like personal loss. And that loss for me was like deeply politicizing. And my obviously like naturally like personal grief, but also just like a sense of like, like life is so fragile and unpredictable and short. And it was just like, for me, I just got this really deep sense of like, given that brevity, given that fragility, given that unpredictability, like injustice felt so grave. Right. It's like we only have this. And like, and people still like mess with it, right? And people still destroy and displace. And like I hadn't really encountered any like liberation theologies, or certainly like not any like philosophers that were engaging like those realities, and those are the disciplines I came up in. And so at a certain point, really early on, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing in my life, but I need to like find the skills to be useful for like the communities that I grew up in, or in the communities like the one I grew up in, which is very, like I said, a large like African American, large Caribbean, large like Latin American diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, the church I grew up in was a trilingual church.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? And so
Mm-hmm.
like on Easter, like our vigil was in still is, I think, English, Spanish, and Haitian Creole.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sort of alternate between the three languages.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and so you know, my like I said, my experience of loss was just like, all right, I got to figure out. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so very much like a lot of the decisions I made after that, I think I was 22, when I lost my mom, um, where I was just like, nothing that I had thought about doing felt commensurate with
Mm-hmm.
uh, the gravity of the situation that like that the world was in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's some like there might be some like hubris in that to say like, oh, like why would you kind of reorganize? But it was really just sort of like following my desires, where I was just like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is as valuable as I need it to be. um
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
you know that made sense at 22, 23.
Mm-hmm.
It still makes sense, um but that's also me, where I'm just like, I'm doing this thing now, okay. That's it. Like, oh, am I gonna like reorganize my life now? Oh yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. 100%. That's what we're doing now. Now I'm gonna...
I love that because one, in just like even in this project that we've been working on together, I've like come to know that that is very much how your mind works. You're like, okay, so I'm doing this, I'm thinking through this, this is where I'm grounded in now. But I love learning. I didn't realize that about you, that you had started off wanting to be a professor, which makes a lot of sense because you're someone who is very thoughtful in a way that is grounded in this understanding of like, I was deeply shaped by the loss of my mother, but also like deeply being challenged to be like, wait, I have to like actually think through and figure out how to like fight injustice and how to fight and think through like, why do some people have everything while the rest of us are kind of like just working and like being killed working under these systems? And that is something that like felt really profound about when I started like editing your work when I was still in Catholic media, where I was like, he understands and has like read all of the philosophy books and all of the theology books, but you weren't talking from like this elitist highbrow place. It was like this like thought and analysis that was very spiritual and powerful and very rooted in the communities that you were from. And that is one of the things where I was like, I think I remember the first conversation where I was like, oh, you should write. Where I was like, you should write. Like, you should just write. You should write something for Catholic media, because those sensibilities that you just described, like that is what I noticed in you. Even just like in our initial interactions on Twitter, when I was like, he is someone who has like experienced something very deeply and has rooted himself in like the changes of this loss, but also in like, okay, I'm thinking for my people and I'm thinking through like the role of faith in that, in a way that has always felt very beautiful to me about your writing and your thinking, yeah, like
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you like trying to get me to write for like a half a decade. That was like legitimately like like it was like a legitimate, maybe even like 60% a decade. Like my I like I am really envious. Less so. I admire the people whose work is rooted in love.
Mm-hmm.
Like you listen to some people talking, they'll say that, right? Where it's like you got to whatever. My first political emotion is anger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just like trying to do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, like I said, I'm 37, so I walked across my like undergrad stage when the Lehman Brothers was collapsing and people were losing their homes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, Black people were losing their homes at this like unprecedented rate. Families were getting destroyed. I lost my mom, but then also like Dick Cheney was still alive. And I was just like, what? How could this be? Like he was on his like third heart, he had like multiple heart, and like, we were in the midst of the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars and like bombing the surrounding areas and like all this like all of this like suffering. And to me, I was just like, yeah, the sense of something being wrong. And like like anger was sort of like a really like politicizing emotion. Like anger and loss were like deeply politicizing experiences and emotions for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because anger is something that, like, in a lot of the spaces that we have been in, anger is often something that Black people are told that they cannot have, right? Because our anger is actually this really powerful revolutionary thing that scares people. And I am now at 34, and part of it is working with you, where I'm like, oh no, like I'm not supposed to repress anger. Like anger is supposed to play a role in this like anti-oppression work and writing and thinking that we're doing. And I love how you said, that anger is an emotion that you like are comfortable with, and like the writing that is grounded in love too, because I think there's this like misconception that if you're really angry then you can't also be loving, that these two emotions, like these two things, can't go hand in hand. And that's just false, right? Like anger, like when I love deeply, I am also really angered and infuriated when something that I love and care for is not treated with like the respect and dignity that it deserves. And so I want to like, we have some questions that we set up, but I want to jump around a little bit, because you talked about how you were politicized and the role that this plays in your writing and thinking. So can you talk a little bit about like what your writing process has been, right? Especially in light of, like you said, you're 37, right? And like the amount of changes that your thinking and analysis has gone through, right? And as someone who was there when you were like hesitant to like, it's so weird to think about how hesitant you were to like step into that writer role. Meanwhile, I was looking at you and I'm like, this dude is like obviously a fucking writer. Like he just is, right? Like he's such a sharp thinker. So I want to hear you just like in your own words kind of describe what your writing process is like and how that connects to like a lot of the politicizing that you mentioned has happened to you.
I think all of my work is grounded in I want to be useful to the communities I care about. And all the communities I care about are poor, are dispossessed, are marginalized, and shouldn't be. And my work is just grounded in an attempt to like center their interests. And my writing is an attempt to be like useful, an attempt to like clarify like what our situations are, to clarify like what's happening to whom and by whom, who benefits, and also just to like let people know that it's not them. Right, to let them know, and also that I hope that that's politicizing, right? Like people aren't crazy for their like experiences in and of these systems, right? That like our political lives and our political economic lives and systems, they like will shape the quality and duration of people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like sometimes it feels as if I'm being dramatic to say things, you know, such as, you know, whatever this is, whatever, prisons, or, you know, policing, or how we distribute food and housing in this country is killing people, right? And so like for me, my project is to center like, you know, basic sort of human and ecological needs, um and in that, to sort of start with folks who are most vulnerable and sort of work our way out. So yeah, that's what I'm up to. I had a really like amazing like confirming experience, and I printed this woman's tweet out,
I love that.
which like, I don't do that. That is don't come back for that, because that is not that is like that is not who I am, right? But I'm trying to like be like flexible and like emotionally nimble. You know, but I wrote this like you know, I wrote this like opinion piece saying that school meals should be free for all kids. And as a part of that, I was just talking about like you know, this sort of the very like an observably unequal distribution of labor, domestic labor, you know, even in sort of coupled households, right, where like moms are just exhausted, and like despite whatever you know, working outside the home, you know, moms are still like doing a ton extra. And I was like, well, since this is like a near universal problem, we should have a universal solution, right? Easy peasy. But like the like really affirming thing was like, you know, this woman like responded to a tweet of mine talking about that, and she was just like, yeah, thank you for writing about this. You know, when I would like leave, I would come back from work and I'd be up late having to prepare my kids lunch for school the next day. Sometimes I just cry. I was by myself. And you know, but California recently expanded, and I think they made like universal you know, free lunch, and it was like such a relief. And like I cried a little bit because I was like, that right, like,
Yep.
something was wrong with that situation, right? And universally so.
Yeah.
And you know, she also like saw you know, herself and her interests in like what I was talking about. And I hope that like it's not, you know, like I'm not writing like self-help, right? Like I don't you know, it's not just like for you to stop at like, it's not just me, but also like it's not just me and let me go talk to my neighbor and like organize. Right. So I hope that like you know, my writing is also a part of like a politicizing process.
I love that. I love that. I'm especially, I want to repeat the line you said because it is just really powerful and it's so grounding for like abolitionist writers who are also like faithful. You said, I want to be useful to communities I care about. And there's so much going on in the world that it can be very, very easy to lose sight of that, right? So much of the work that we are doing is to be useful to the communities that we care about. And also with the hopes of like, oh, wow, someone is reading Dwayne's piece on Cop City, right? For example, you wrote a piece on Cop City for Religion and Revolt a few weeks ago. Someone is reading this and now they understand why this is so dangerous, what could be happening down there. And I think it's powerful to be able to work with you knowing that your writing is rooted in this like love and accountability to the communities that you are from, but also with the reality and understanding that it's like we have to understand that these systems want us to not understand how they like humiliate us and actually like make surviving here harder. And that has been even as someone who has edited with you, who like thinks through weekly content with you, that has been helpful for me, because I think for a while I was afraid to do that. I was afraid to be like, wait, something feels wrong about the world, but I don't actually like fully understand how to connect those dots. And so much of your work feels like so much of the work that you produce and create and put out in the world has helped me do that. So I'm just here affirming you as well, because this is me with my editor hat on. I'm just like completely gonna just like keep affirming the work that you're doing. So saying all that you have shared about what your work is grounded in, who you are thinking about and accountable to, and like the writing that you have done, you're also a contributing writer, you write in a bunch of different places. What feels different about what you're doing in Religion and Revolt right now? Like, what feels different about the content that you and I are creating and putting out there? What feels different about this work?
I think there is like an inherently communal part of this that I think will be clear as we continue to build. Because I think like one, it's a sort of interfaith or multi-faith project, right? So it's not just sort of like Christians that we're interacting and with and in the future collaborating with. And I think there are a lot of folks, for whom religious life or spiritual life is still like a really important kind of like life category, who may or may not have, or who might want to kind of grow in the sort of connection between their like liberatory politics and their faith, right? And I think there's an element of Religion and Revolt that I'm hoping will be those people finding their people, and I'm hoping that we'll be among their people, and I think like I think like there is I think religion, in terms of its political value, is always subordinated to the sort of culture and system that it sort of grows up in, right? And so like, if you're in a patriarchal society, the religion will also be patriarchal, because so will the economy, and so will the the sort of family dynamics, right? And so and fill in the blank, right? And so like I'm hoping that us doing us doing this sort of like liberation theology very publicly, and inviting others to do that, and all that includes like critique, right? That isn't to say like a kind of rosy accounting of like any of these traditions that we or others have come up in, but I'm hoping that like it's a kind of like a kind of homing beacon, for like do-gooder oddballs with like like liberationist lens, both who are coming out of it from like kind of religious space to like get more politicized, right? And on the other side, like folks who I think a lot of us of various traditions have to go into these kind of formal institutions and just turn off a part of our brains, right? And it's like, this is how I'm gonna exist here today, to make it through, and I don't fault people that, right? There's a deep like like cultural element and communal and like familial thing, you know and also to know like, oh, this is messed up.
Yep.
And so like the only way to sort of to fill that absence is to fill it. And so like yeah, so I'm really excited, I'm really excited to see like what shape that takes, 'Cause I don't know. I just know it can be kind of cool, right? I just have faith in that, like, if you bring a bunch of really, like, you bring a bunch of people together, who are well-meaning and thoughtful, and good, uh, we'll sort of, it'll, something, we'll kind of grab with some intention, right? Not to say that, like, some spontaneous happening. I don't believe in that either, but
Right.
like, like we had like really great conversations around like reading Baldwin recently, and that's not a thing that we had planned 6 months ago. But we put out a call and then created some structures, some ground rules, and whatever. And so, and then we'll keep doing that. And I'm really excited for that. And that's the thing that, like, you don't really get a chance to do, in like most, at least I don't get a chance to do in most of my public writing, is like, I am excited to like try to like create a community with folks.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and I am really grateful to be able to work with you. I know I keep saying that, but I don't care. I'm really grateful because you are challenging me. I think I often come into this very rigid, and you often have to ground me in, like, yeah, like, our moral clarity and the intentions we have, like, those are set and we know what we're doing. But also we can have fun with this, and this is going to look, every 6 months it's going to look very different. And for a while that felt very scary to me, but I'm learning to just like let go and kind of just like enjoy the work that we're doing, because so much of what we get to do together is fun. Like, we get to like learn and think in ways that is just so refreshing and so reinvigorating. And the last question I have for you, I don't know how many people know this, or maybe people who follow you online probably know this well enough, but you are obsessed with space and you love talking about space. So for our final question for you, why are you always talking about space?
Man, so it's been like a year, and it's one of those things that like that feels like it's been more than a year because it's super on brand. But like, yeah, I honestly, I was just super moved by the kind of like basic kind of cosmic history, and well, let me start. I am not a hippie. I'm gonna say some like kind of hippie adjacent stuff. I'm not a hippie, but you know, I was just super moved when I like learned sort of basic kind of cosmological history about like, and it, in particular, like everything and everyone coming from the same place and being the same stuff. That part, and just how big the known universe is. The scale really, really kind of like, there was just like something deeply beautiful about both of those things. And it was just like on a much, obviously like much larger scale. Just like really resonated with some experiences I had. Like I spent a lot of time in like in Mexico and Central America, and I remember my first time down there in Nicaragua. I was at a bar drinking, and it was a karaoke night, and there were like some dudes were singing ranchera. It was like my first time hearing it, and I was just like, yo, this is the blues, and like it's like, that's, it's like not exactly, but like like pretty close. And there was just something beautiful in that. Like, I had never like encountered that before, and I was just like, man, we are just like trying to do so much of the same stuff. I was like, at the time, like I just picked up like just enough Spanish to start like following along, and like plus like dude was drunk, and like I was a little drunk, and he was like teary eyed. And I was like, yo, dog, like I have also been hurt. Like, I was just like, And I'm like, yo, I've had the blues before too, bro. And like we just like couldn't be more different. But I was like, yeah, and so like around this time last year, I was just like really tired and like just had been in pandemic for several years. And the world is the world as it is. And then I just sort of like learned this history about like all the stuff that we know just sort of like emanating from this like fraction of a second. And that just blew me away. And it's true. It's not like perfectly like it's not politically meaningful, right? Because like lots of societies have said like, yeah, like we do come from the same place and we are made up of the same stuff. I'm just made up of better stuff. Right. And so like it doesn't rule out like subjugation.
Right.
In a way that like when at first blush, I was like, deeply romantic, right? I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
We're all stardust. And like we're all the same. And that was a moment. But then I was like, well, wait a second. Like lots of societies have done that. And they're like, yeah, we're the same. And it's a pyramid and you're on the bottom. Right. Right. So it's not like politically meaningful in like exactly the way I wish it was, but it's still beautiful. And like, yeah. So that's what I'm doing. And I like, and I really appreciate that. That's like a thing that, I've learned that like we have in common. I was like, oh, I think Olga likes space too.
Yeah. And there's so many like behind the scenes religion and revolt conversations where it'll be like the most recent one was like 10 p.m. on like a random Saturday where you were like, hey, I'm looking at stars and planets. Look what Saturn or Jupiter. It was something. You were like stargazing, and I was like, yeah. Like there are so many conversations that we're just like, have you seen the moon tonight? And here's a like shitty shot of like the moon in the sky. Because you're right, even if it might not have any sort of like political analysis or whatever, like it is still beautiful. And something about that feels grounding when you and I are like texting from different places and like the East Coast, like, oh, you see the moon? The moon is like stunning tonight. And yeah, it's just beautiful to be able to be like, we don't only have to think about like the ways that we are subjugated in these systems. It's also like, look at how stunning all the stars are. Like something about looking up and being like, I am so small and insignificant in the most beautiful of ways, right? Like the universe is like, you are a part of me, but not the only part. So yeah, the Religion and Revolt team is also like really obsessed with space.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful kind of way to round that out, right? Where like, in terms of like a small part, and yeah, it isn't like I so want that to just be like the perfect kind of thing, but it's not, it doesn't have to be. I do think like this sort of sense of I don't feel scared when I like look out into space. Like I think that's something we talked about, like I would go today, like I would go right now. If I could steal one of Elon's rockets, I would go this instant. Like I don't like the grandeur doesn't like that grandeur where I'm looking at the ocean. Like I love like looking at like the ocean from like a really high vantage point or a close vantage point. And the same like looking out into space, like there is a kind of like intimacy is like the best word I can feel I can like, describe. Like there's a sense of connection there with like other people, and with like creation, you know, and like thinking about what's dope about space is like looking outward, you know, like we can like look at photos and sort of see the planet. And it's only here that like the internal diversity of the planet seems like a big deal. You know what I mean? But like looking out, you know, like the genetic variation between like us and like other animals is really small, much as like other humans, right? It's like there is not. But like between like us and an octopus is like it's not that much, right? And it's like obviously like we came up in the same like place, right? And that's just like beautiful to me, and like it is deeply deeply moving and like romantic to me. I love it. I absolutely love it. I absolutely.
No, I love that. I love that. Thank you so much for like your vulnerability. I feel like you were very, very vulnerable, not just in like sharing your writing process, the loss that you have had to experience, but even in this, even in your thoughts about space, like space and the ocean, honestly, because there is something deeply intimate and connective about these spaces that just feels like very, very grounding to be able to be like looking at these different elements of nature and be like, we are all like connected. We are all one. Like we are all a part of this vast, vast system. So thank you so much for your vulnerability today.
Thank you for you know, these questions and this conversation. This was really fun. This was a fun exercise.
Yeah, it was really, really great. And as we could ramble on about a lot of things. Even hearing you say octopus, I was like, we can go down that road, but let's not.
I feel so intensely about octopus.
Same. They're just like marvelous, marvelous beings that can like shapeshift. Okay, that's it. That's all we'll say, because we will go down that rabbit hole. But thank you also to everyone who is going to watch this conversation when it drops later this week. We're going to have a second part next week where Dwayne is going to be interviewing me, and that'll be really, really fun. So make sure, if you are not subscribed already, subscribe and check out our work at religionrevolt.org. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Instagram is Religion and Revolt. We are on Twitter at Religion Revolts. So yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.